Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. That is a wonderful introduction. I don't think I've ever had such background music before, so that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for joining us here. I hope you're having a wonderful GITEX. It's my first time. I'm amazed about the scale and the organization. So big kudos to all the organizers here who are running around and making this happen. Now, a little bit about myself. My name is Vijji Suryadevara, and I'm the head of delivery of cognitive solutions at Autonomous. It's a NEOM company. And we'll go a little bit over what Autonomous does a little bit later. But just a bit about myself. I grew up in India. I come from a family where I was the first one to go to college. I did my bachelor's and master's in computer science, started off coding network management solutions for telecom, went on to start 2 companies in Silicon Valley. I've exited one successfully, one didn't go so well, but everything is a learning experience. Then I went on to hold leadership positions in IoT and AI startups. So that's a little bit about me. So when we talk about future cities, what comes to your mind, right? What do you think you want to change? I want to give you all 5 seconds to think about what would you change if you had the chance, a magic wand, to say how my city would be different or how the future city would be different. Just think about it. Close your eyes, think about it. And now you tell me if any of this came to your mind. Housing, transportation, water, electricity, healthcare, living standards, which could be how the recreational facilities or open spaces are there, how educational opportunities are there, how pollution is managed in your city, and finally, civic services, how your government gives you the services that you need. Did any of these or many of these come to your mind? As many of us drove in, one of my good colleagues here, Rajesh, who's sitting in the audience, helped me drive over. I think I would have been lost today if I came by myself. The traffic was so bad because GITEX is so huge. But in general, most of us face these problems in our cities. So why do we want to focus on cities, right? Why only on cities? Today, 56% of our population in the world, of 4.4 billion people, live in cities. By 2050, the World Bank estimates that the urban population will double, and it will be 68% of us living in the city. So almost 7 in 10 people will live in cities by 2050. And 80% of the GDP of the world today is coming from cities, right? So this is where everything is happening. This is where all of us are coming together. This is where productivity is happening. This is where people are living better standards. And so urbanization continues to be a transformative thing for human civilization. What are some of the problems, right? We all thought about some of the issues that I brought up, but are there only issues that we are facing? Not really. 1 billion people in the world are living in informal settlements across the continents. What we think is a problem, I come from the Bay Area in California, and housing is super expensive, and we are dealing with unhoused people. But that's not an issue just from one continent, it's across the world. We have to solve the problem of housing. Transportation. Transportation is a major issue, doesn't matter which city. I was in Hyderabad recently for a meeting, and we were in the car for an hour and a half to get to our destination, which should have been 15 to 20 minutes. Because of how traffic is managed and how things are happening, that is a huge issue. Environmental issues are becoming bigger and bigger. Again, I'm drawing from my own experience. I come from California. Wildfires are there all the time. And sparked by what? By electricity wires that are above ground. And we are not able to monitor those wires and see where do we have to cut down the vegetation, because we don't have enough people to do that. Don't we have the technology to do that? Think about it. And finally, livability. As more of the world becomes an advanced age. And here I'll give you a few examples of my own mom, who is 70 plus. How do we deal with the aging population of the world? How do we make our cities more livable for them, more inclusive for them? So for all these reasons, all of us here, all the brilliant minds who are coming up with technologies and all the different things that we've seen before with our previous speakers here, we have to think about the problems we want to solve. What are the problems that we are trying to solve? Now, some of the definitions that the UN SDG 11, you can go back and read since we are running short of time. I'm not going to read through all of them. But these are addressing some of the same things that we talked about. What are the kinds of sustainable living conditions which are allowing every one of us to live the best life we can? It seems like a pipe dream, but it is absolutely possible, and that's what we'll talk about today. So how do we change the cities? How do we make this change happen? And when I'm talking about the technologies here, I want to think about this in terms of the architectural layout. Since most of you are technical or technical adjacent audience, I will give you a mental picture to make. When we talk about smart cities, we start off, first of all, with the devices that are on the bottom layer, right? The IoT-enabled devices, whether it's your phone, your thermostats, your security cameras, your door opening machines, whatever else you can think of, or your automated transportation. All of these are the lowest layer. The next layer is the mobile networks, not mobility, mobile networks. How do we transport the data generated by all of these across various places? That's the next layer. The layer after that is the data layer, right? How do we bring all this data that's coming from everywhere through these networks together and form a cohesive picture? The layer after that is the API or the service layer. How do we then open up these data points to all the applications which sit on the top? That's the final layer, application layer. So in my mind, when I think about IoT or smart city solutions, these are the 5 layers that I'm thinking about, right? So when we look at what's happening, how can we achieve this? It's the AI, it's the IoT, it's the mobile and 5G networks, it's cloud computing, big data, APIs, and dashboards. All of this enable us to work towards this vision that we want to have. Now, what is stopping us? Why can't we have this today, right? The problem is lack of suitable infrastructure. Current infrastructure in most countries is very old, and it is not suitable for us to take it and move forward. And I'll give you a live example a little bit later. Cost of replacing existing infrastructure is quite high. And getting that public-private partnerships to happen so we can actually make this change happen and bear the cost across the public-private partnership is also hard to achieve in many countries. Legislation and policies is another problem. Very often, the legislatures of most countries are not technically savvy. They don't know how to make the laws to suit and enable the change that can happen, or sometimes they are behind in controlling the negative change that comes also sometimes with technology. So legislation and policies are a hindrance. And finally, lack of confidence on the resident side. Very often, when we have technologies being implemented in cities, without including the people who are there, they look at these technologies with distrust because they don't know how they're working. They don't know what's in it for them. So really, that makes it very hard to buy the political will, to make the changes, to do the investments, to make the technology happen. It's all linking together. In terms of technology challenges, and this is where the exciting part of working at Autonomous is, we are trying to solve all of these problems. Check out our booth outside. I'm going to do a little plug. Check out our booth. Check out our workshops that are happening. Some brilliant minds are here who are trying to solve these problems across the board. The problems start from identity. How do we have seamless experiences in a city? How do we transfer and identify the person as the same person when they go from one place to another? If I'm here in GITEX, and I'm being scanned, when I go and try to get a transportation, I don't have to log into another one. Why do I have to? Right? I'm the same person. When I go into my hotel, there's another identity there. When I log into my email, there's another identity there. When we are talking about these seamless experiences, if we don't solve identity, I know there are a lot of work going on in self-sovereign identity and other kinds of identity, but really solving that is one of the biggest challenges. Second one, and very important one, is data privacy and consent. How do we do this work where we require more and more data from users with their consent, where we are not giving them big terms and conditions that nobody is reading and just clicking OK? Instead, we want them to understand that what value will they get when they give this data exchange, right? You give your data for a value that you get from it. And how do we make this work? How do we redefine this whole model of how do we collect data from users with their consent? And then data sharing APIs. How do we share data across systems, right? This is the biggest challenge we have, interoperability, data transfer protocols. I mentioned I would give you an example. Before this position, I was working on an IoT platform for pharmaceutical industry. And guess what? The biggest problem was not setting up the data pipeline. MQTT is sweet. Kafka is reliable. All those things are great. The biggest problem was connecting to the device and getting the data back. Because some devices we had to work with in Modbus. I don't know how many of you know Modbus. If any of you has worked with devices, you will know. It's like reading registers. Then we had to use things like TCP/IP, we had to use HTTP in some cases, and we had to use MT Connect in some cases. So really, the protocols that are there to talk to devices have to be harmonized, and we need this interoperability. Explainable and ethical AI is, again, an important point to think about. When we are talking about AI, very often, a few years ago, when I first started on AI in my second company, which was an AI-driven career advisor, which is why I was very relating to the previous speaker who was talking about, upskilling people. This system that we created, very often, when we use deep learning, we did not know exactly how it arrived at that solution. We just know it fit. And it fit the data, and we were getting a certain level of accuracy, but explaining it was very hard. But now there's a lot of work happening in explainable AI. And then finally, digital security. We all know the challenges we are facing in cybersecurity and digital security, and this will only become more and more. Many of us drive cars which can be hacked into, and how much information can be got from it. And we don't even think about it, right? So I think as we proliferate all these internet-connected devices, thinking about security becomes imperative. So some of the implementations today in AI smart cities, there are some individual use cases that various countries and cities are doing, and they're doing really well. There are things like traffic management, parking spaces, parking management, security and safety in public spaces, where you have cameras run and you are able to identify when some security incident is happening, waste management, pollution monitoring, and of course, street lights and smart metering. Now, when you look at all of these examples, they are all about after the fact, right? They are about how do we optimize things once something has happened. None of these are thinking about what can we plan ahead. And this is where I think we need to think differently. We all need to think about not how do I solve today's traffic, but how do I plan ahead for next year, for next 10 years, next 50 years, right? We have to think differently. So what are some of the innovations that excite me personally? And again, we've been talking about this. Do check out the workshops that we are having. But edge AI. Earlier, all AI systems tended to be the ones where you collect all the information from the IoT devices and send them upstream to the cloud, where we would process them. And that worked great for individual use cases. Imagine this in a smart city or cognitive city as we are building at NEOM, where everything is connected. How much data are you going to send upstream and downstream? And for what purpose, right? So we have to get better at making decisions at the point that matters. And the only way we can do that is by doing edge AI. And then doing explainable AI and frictionless experiences, and digital twins and metaverse. There's a lot to talk about. I know I had shorter time than expected, but I'm super excited about this, what the transformative nature is of all of this. And I want to leave you with this last one quote. In the last 50 years, any of you who are thinking this is all pie in the sky thinking, we've been talking about this, think about what happened in the last 50 years. As I mentioned, I'm the first person who went to college in my family. My mom grew up in a home, my dad grew up in a home where they did not have electricity, running water. And today, we are all flying all around the world, connecting and talking to each other on phones, which is unthinkable, right? If we could do that in the last 20, 30 years, think what we can do in the next 50 years. Again, thank you so much for being such a great audience, and hope to talk to you all soon.